Welcome to the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's regulation of spent nuclear fuel shipments. I'm Caitlin Ty with the Council of State Governments Midwestern Office, and I'm managing logistics for the webinar today. We'll start with a few housekeeping announcements. First, this webinar is being recorded. Right now, you can access the slides from today's presentation in the handout pane of your GoToWebinar control panel or by visiting the webinars page on the NTSF wiki site. A recording of the webinar, including both audio and video, will be available later today, also on the wiki site. Second, all participant lines are in listen-only mode right now, and will stay that way until we take questions when the presentations are over. Even though you're all muted, we want this webinar to be interactive. If you have a question during the presentations, please let us know, either by typing your question in the GoToWebinar questions pane or by clicking on the hand icon in the Grab tab to raise your hand. Written questions will be read out loud, and I encourage you to submit them throughout the webinar. If you raise your hand, I'll unmute your line so that you can ask your question. If you accidentally click on the button to raise your hand, just click it again and it will turn off. A few tips if you do plan to raise your hand to ask a question. If you're using your telephone, please make sure to enter your 2-digit audio PIN, which you'll find in the audio pane. If you selected mic and speakers, please test your settings by clicking on the link in the audio pane that says Settings. Here is an image showing the GoToWebinar control panel, where you'll find the audio pane, questions pane, and the hand icon. This control panel is set to minimize itself so it won't be in the way, but the Grab tab will remain, so you can raise your hand or expand the control panel to type a question. To expand the control panel, click the orange button. Now I'll turn the floor over to Michael Wangler, Transport Safety and Security Specialist at DOE's Office of Environmental Management and NTSF Chair. He's going to share some background information on the NTSF and introduce today's speakers.
Thanks, Caitlin. Good afternoon, everyone. The DOE's Office of Environmental Management established the NTSF in 2009 to serve as the mechanism through which DOE communicates at a national level with states and tribes about DOE shipments of radioactive wastes and materials. Since 2010, the NTSF has met annually, and our next meeting will be held in June of 2016. We hope to send a save the date notice out later this year, and I'll give you a little bit more information about the next meeting at the end of the seminar. Between our annual meetings, webinars like this one help the Department of Energy to reach out to our NTSF members on topics of interest to states and tribes. These webinars are also an effective mechanism for keeping the lines of communication open in a way that is both cost-effective and convenient for everyone. Today's webinar, and others planned for this year, will address requirements and practices that might apply to shipments of spent fuel from shut-down nuclear power plants, as well as what the state and tribal roles will be in connection with those shipments. Today's subject, NRC regulation of spent fuel shipments, was requested during an attendee survey at our last NTSF annual meeting in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now, here to speak with us on this topic are three representatives from the NRC: Jerry Jackson, David Strack, and Stuart Eason. Jerry Jackson is assigned to the Division of Security Policy in the Office of Nuclear Security and Incident Response, and currently works in the Fuel Cycles and Transportation Security Branch. His duties include conducting technical and regulatory reviews in support of regulatory programs, as well as transportation route approvals, rulemaking, and licensing. David Strack is a senior project manager in the Division of Spent Fuel Management in the NRC's Office of Nuclear Materials Safety and Safeguards. Stuart Eason is a project manager and tribal liaison in the Division of Materials, State, Tribal, and Rulemaking, which has the primary responsibility for the NRC's Tribal Liaison Program. Jerry, David, and Stuart will explain the methods of reviewing and approving routes for nuclear fuel shipments and discuss advanced notification procedures, including the new regulations that allow for advanced notifications of tribes. And at this point, I would like to turn the floor over to presenter David Strack. David?
Thank you, Mike. We are still working through some minor, I think we just found it here, some minor glitches. Caitlin, can you see this presentation?
Hi, David. Yes, I pulled up your slides. You can just tell me when to click through.
Okay. Very good. So we're going to start with Jerry. You're on.
Hey, Caitlin. Good afternoon. So if you can see my slides, if you could just advance it one slide, please. Perfect. Good afternoon. My name again is Jerry Jackson. I work for the Office of Nuclear Security Incident Response. I'm going to touch on 4 points today. We're going to talk about spent nuclear fuel, how applications for routes are submitted, accepted, reviewed, and ultimately approved by Commission staff. I'm going to touch on the requirements for advanced notifications, what's required when notifying the NRC and state and tribal organizations for the movement of the fuel. I'm going to touch on the requirements for pre-planning and coordination with local law enforcement. And then I'm going to do a very, very high-level look at the requirements for Category 1, Category 2 of radioactive materials. While not spent fuel, some of the notification requirements and coordination requirements are the same as with spent or radioactive fuel. Slide, please. So my first slide is I want to touch on the acceptance process. And first I'd like to note that information that is sent to the NRC will be sent in accordance to safeguards requirements. And for a reference, you'll see the reference there of 10 CFR 7322, the requirements for transmitting classified material or safeguards material. When the NRC receives the application, staff will do an acceptance review, and that consists of opening up the package, making sure that the information is in the correct format, that's both digital and hard copy. The proper or the route and mileage charts are included. Safe havens have been identified. Maps are included. Communications, phone numbers, contacts, all that information is included. Staff will go through that, and if we think that, as we're looking at the package as it is, that all of the information is in the package, we will send an acceptance letter to the applicant indicating that we will do our route review and have a response back within 30 working days. Slide, please. The details of the review process. This is a more in-depth review of the application. We look at each segment of the route as provided by the applicant. We will look at, if it's a 4-state route, we will look at each one of the states. We will look at the routes. We will make sure that the routes are in accordance with regulations as far as avoiding population centers. We'll look at locations of local law enforcement. We'll see that the safe havens have been identified. We'll look at the road choices. Are we taking a route that will bypass a highway, interstate highway bypass around a major city, or are we talking rural routes through a major city? And just a note on that, we understand that at some times you have to make choices as to which way you're going to go. Coming out of a reactor or going into a repository, we understand you're going to move along state and local and county roads. We understand that, but for the most part, we're looking at, did the applicant do due diligence in picking its route? Pending all of that information being correct, the NRC will, if required, submit requests for additional information to the applicant. And as we're doing our review, we're actually making phone calls. We are calling the point of contacts as listed. We are looking to make sure the phone numbers are correct, and that the road choices are applicable. To date, there have been just a few questions back and forth. In one case, an applicant put an application in, and I questioned the phone number, and came back that the state had actually changed their point of contact. The person submitting the route had actually gone above and beyond, made extra phone calls, and identified the proper point of contact. So that gives me a greater comfort as we're reviewing the applications, because the license applicant did, or rather the route applicant did, a good job digging into the information required for the route. If all of this is acceptable, we will send an approval letter to the applicant stating that the route has been approved. And road routes are approved for 5 years, and rail routes are approved for 7 years. Slide, please. Just for reference, this is a slide on some of the guidance we have. When you submit your route review, you can use our new Reg 0561 Revision 2. It's a great guide. It has definitions of definitions of safe havens, coordination, what's required, and it has some of the forms in the back that we've used and accepted from existing route reviews, and it's a great resource for applicants submitting a application. Slide, please. I also noted, and it's important to reference the requirements for protecting information. So I included this guide as well. It's publicly available. I put up the ML number and the website where you can go, the link to get this document. Guide to markings and safeguards information. It's how to properly send that application that I referenced. And this is important because we don't want this type of information to come out of our control or the applicant's control. So if you have any questions, you can use this guide, or again, you can always give me a call on my contact information that'll be available. Slide, please. So I want to touch on notification, and again, I'm going to go very high on notification, and we're talking about spent or irradiated reactor fuel, and the Code of Federal Regulations that points to those requirements is 10 CFR 7337. And just a quick note, I used color because sometimes this can get confusing, so I'm going to talk about irradiated reactor fuel 7337, and that points to two references, CFR 7372 and CFR 7197. Now, those two references, 7372 and 7197, point to different requirements for notification. And the first one, 7372, points to the notification requirements being made to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and 7197 points to requirements for states and tribal officials. And those will be covered a little bit more in depth by subsequent presentations. Slide. This is the language out of 7337, advanced notifications, and again, it points to the requirements for notifications for governors of the state, governor designee, and it points to the requirements for the tribal official or the tribal official's designee for notification. And again, this will be covered a little bit more in depth later on today. Slide, please. So the details of the requirements for notification to the NRC, Again, this is very high level. I'm not going to read every one of the lines, but it's highlighted in red at least 10 days before the transportation of the shipment commences. The detailed coordination needs to be made. And that is also where you start talking about the detailed coordination with the state and local contacts for information for contacts and meeting vehicles and escorts and that type of thing. Next slide. And this is the more detailed, again, I'm not going to read each one of these, but these are the timelines for notification to the NRC. And I'd like to point out number 5, that's important because we understand that situations change, road situations change, weather effects happen, schedules change. So keep in mind that we understand this, and that if you give a phone call to the NRC and let us know, that's fully acceptable, and we can adjust and go forward from there. Next slide, please. Again, I'm not going to go too deeply into this. This is, again, notification for the tribal or tribal designee or the governor. Again, Stuart's going to cover this a little deeper, but the same type of requirements for notification are in 7197. Slide, please. I'd like to touch a little bit on pre-planning and coordination. Again, this is a requirement found in 7337. This talks about no later than 2 weeks prior to the shipment of the reactor or the irradiated reactor fuel. Looking at your current road conditions, looking at construction situations, looking at weather situations. That's when you're going to start talking to your and confirming with your state, local law enforcement officials where the escorts are going to come in. Have you properly designated and coordinated the safe havens? When you note a safe haven, does the local law enforcement understand and accept that safe haven, or are they going to get back to you and say that's not a good place, maybe you should think about this? And again, we understand that. It's the fact that you're doing due diligence to coordinate with your local representatives as this fuel, as this irradiated reactor fuel moves along your route. Next slide. The same type of requirements are for state and tribals, the governor's designee, and the state. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong slide. Okay, this is the slide for coordination with state and tribal representatives. The notifications required when you're departing your point of origin, when you're going to be entering into the states, and when you're going to be arriving at your final destination. Slide, please. My last point here, or agenda item, 10 CFR 37 is the physical protection of Category 1 and Category 2 quantities of radioactive material. And as I said before, while not irradiated reactor fuel, they have some of the similar requirements. You'll notice that it has requirements for physical protection, requirements for planning and coordination, requirements for advance notification. So again, not to get too deep into it. Next slide. I just highlighted the requirements for pre-planning and coordination of Category 1 material. And again, it talks about coordination of the shipment arrival and departure times, pre-plan and coordinate with the governor, governor designee, law enforcement escorts, identification of safe havens, and document planning and coordination activities. So while not exactly the same as the requirements for irradiated reactor fuel, Category 1 radioactive material has similar requirements. Slide. Pending any questions, I think we're going to hold those to the end. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. David Strack.
Thank you, Jerry. My presentation this afternoon is on advanced notification and the transportation of irradiated reactor fuel. And these are the notifications to the states and to the tribes. The things that I will go through are actions that our NRC licensees must do when they are making shipments of spent nuclear fuel. and those are to make the notifications to the state and notifications to the tribes. This slide here is my overview. The overall topic is advanced notification. I will touch on each of these 3 bullets: the timeline, the information to be furnished, a revision and cancellation notice requirement, and although I will take questions, we're going to hold all the questions until after Stuart speaks, the 3rd speaker. Overall, the purpose of advanced notification is to contribute to the security, safety, and the ease of transport of radioactive material. You'll see here as I go through this information that there is a coordinated effort that the licensee must do to make the notifications. The timeline is of utmost importance because it gives the receiver of the information, basically the various states and the tribes, it gives them an opportunity to react and or plan for the shipment that will eventually be coming their way into their borders. Next slide, please. Within our regulations at 10 CFR 7197, the actual title of that section 97 is Advanced Notification of Shipments of Irradiated Reactor Fuel and Nuclear Waste. So the information here is both for irradiated reactor fuel and for certain nuclear wastes that are being transported. This topic this afternoon, I'm only going to be focusing on the irradiated reactor fuel portion. So this advanced notification is required when a shipment of irradiated reactor fuel is being made. The advanced notification is made in writing to the appropriate governor or to the governor's designee and to the tribal official or the tribal official designee, as well as the licensee must also notify the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the director of our Nuclear Security and Incident Response Office. There is a timeline. I have two slides that address that in just a moment. It's important to note as well that each year around June 30th or prior to June 30th of each year, the NRC does publish in the Federal Register a list of the current contact information for the governor, the governor's designee, and the tribal official or the tribal official designee. Next slide, please. The timeline associated with making advance notification is pretty straightforward. A notification can be delivered by mail, and that notification must be postmarked at least 7 days before the beginning of the 7-day period during which the shipment may occur. And then likewise, a notification can be made by other means, such as by fax or an electronic transmittal. That must also go to the governor or governor's designee or the tribal official or the tribal official designee at least 4 days before the beginning of the 7-day period during which shipment may occur. If you notice the last 2 phrases on each of those bullets, it talks about the 7-day period during which the shipment may occur. I often refer to that as the shipping window. There's a 7-day period when the licensee can actually physically make that shipment, and that is coordinated in the notification that is made. That notification, that window gives the licensee some flexibility as they coordinate this overall effort to make this shipment. They want to ensure that they have made all the notifications. They want to make sure that they have the physical protective measures that you just heard Jerry speak about, that they have those in place, and that there's not going to be a broken link in the chain anywhere at the beginning of the shipment to the end. So that 7-day window is authorized and is structured in our regulations at 7197. Next slide, please. The information that is required to be furnished within the advance notification is, in some regard, very basic information: the name and address and phone number of the shipper, the carrier, and the receiver, and the actual description of the material. That is information that the U.S. Department of Transportation routinely requests whenever any type of radioactive material is being packaged and transported. So this is not a new requirement or something unique for this overall scenario of shipping spent fuel, but it is a step in the required set of requirements that this information must be furnished. The additional 6 bullets that you see there address more specifically the actual information associated with the shipment itself, the point of origin, The last bullet is a point of contact, somebody who would be knowledgeable of the shipment, not only in all the preparation, but during the actual shipping time period. I also mentioned a little bit ago about the 7-day shipping window. The date of that 7-day shipping window is part of what is in the notification, as well as the 7-day arrival window at the state boundary or at the tribal reservation boundary. And then lastly, the destination of the shipment and the arrival window, 7-day arrival window. Once again, you can imagine that this is a very coordinated effort to, depending on which state the shipment is coming from. If it's going from one state to another, that's only one boundary. But if it's going across 6 or 7 different states, you can imagine the licensee has many, many hoops to jump through. These are all regulatory hoops that must be met. Next slide, please. In the event that either something has changed with the shipment or something has changed with the date, or if the licensee actually has to cancel the shipment completely, there are provisions within 7197 that address either the revision notice or a cancellation notice. During the revision notice scenario, the licensee would need to contact an individual in the governor's office and or in the tribal official or the tribal official's designee's office and notify them that there has been a revision. The revision might be something as simple as, hey, we're not going to be able to ship within this current 7-day window. We're going to add a different window. Or the date is not going to happen. We're going to revise the actual date. Information about the extent of the delay would be part of that notification. As well, there's a record retention requirement to maintain that record for 3 years. Likewise, if the whole scenario needs to be canceled, a cancellation notice can be made, again, to the governor or the governor's designee, to the tribal official or the tribal official designee, as well as to our director of the security office here at the NRC. It must be indicated on the notice that it is a cancellation, and once again, the documentation would be maintained for a 3-year period. Next slide, please. This slide shows a spent nuclear fuel cask. This is a rail cask shipment. The advanced notification requirements would be applicable to a rail shipment as well. So although this is just one example of a spent fuel cask in transit, this is not the only example. Obviously, there's a highway scenario. But overall, the whole theme of advanced notification for shipments of irradiated reactor fuel is contained in our regulations at 7197. Although I have questions here, once again, we already teed up that we would hold the questions till the end. So that is my final slide. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Stuart.
Thank you, Dave. Hello, everyone. My name is Stuart Eason, a tribal liaison at the NRC. I'm here to share a little bit about what we do as tribal liaisons, and then talk some on advanced notification to Native American tribes of transportation of certain types of nuclear waste. Next slide. Allow me to start by introducing the Tribal Liaison Program at the NRC. Our mission is to foster effective consultation, cooperation, and communications between the NRC and tribal governments. Next slide, please. One way we provide aid is in consultations. Typically, consultations are related to licensing new or existing reactors, ISFACs, and uranium recovery facilities. Tribal liaison staff are not the lead in these consultations. However, we do provide guidance on cultural sensitivities, historical context, and current emerging issues. Because we aid in a variety of office activities, we are able to provide a conduit for information sharing within the NRC. Next slide, please. The tribal liaison staff participate in meetings and conferences. For example, each year, the NRC hosts the Regulatory Information Conference here in Rockville. Over the past few years, liaison staff has manned a table providing information and building awareness on the agency's tribal activities. This conference is heavily attended by industry and state organizations. Next slide. The liaison staff also work to build awareness within the agency by organizing presentations from tribal nations and from other agencies. Inviting these types of information exchange allows NRC staff to engage tribal members while learning many cultural differences between the tribes. Inviting agencies to present on their programs allows staff to learn and adopt best practices. And this photo here was taken this year when the NRC invited the Onondaga leadership to our headquarters. Next slide. The liaison staff organized 5 pilot training programs to educate tribal students and community members on topics such as health physics, radiation protection, and environmental regulations, such as NEPA and Section 106. The goal of this training was to empower tribal members with knowledge so that they can ask the right questions if ever involved in consultations. Next slide. And the tribal policy statement. Liaison staff has taken the lead in developing an agency-wide tribal policy statement, protocol manual, and implementation plan. We just completed a review of the internal guidance to make sure that there's no conflict when the policy statement goes final, which is estimated in June 2016. I'd like to thank the NTSF Tribal Caucus for their time in submitting comments to this effort. Next slide. As a regulator, our mission is to protect people and the environment, and our trust responsibility to Native American tribes translates into ensuring tribes receive the same protections as everyone else. Liaison staff do that in part by educating both NRC staff and tribes and work to ensure that tribal members receive information they need to make decisions that impact their community. Next slide. One of the activities that impact tribes across the lower 48 states is the NRC's advanced notification rule. This amendment to our regulations provided the tribes with the same notifications that the states receive when spent nuclear fuel or other source material special material crosses federal reservation land. One of the most prominent differences between the states and tribes regarding this rule is that tribes need to enroll in order to receive the notifications, whereas the states do not. It was decided during the rulemaking process that enrolling tribes without their consent into a procedure that has penalties for failure to secure information without giving any training on safeguards requirements was unethical and inconsistent with the NRC's trust responsibility. This is the rationale why tribes were given the option to enroll. As Dave mentioned, that on or about June 30th of each year, the NRC publishes the list of governors or designees that receive notifications. Any tribe that opts into this program will be listed along with the state representatives. To date, there are no tribes that have completed the requirements to begin receiving advance notification. In the event that a tribe does opt in after this June publication date, the NRC would begin processes to inform all interested parties. Next slide, please. So there are 3 steps that are needed to complete in order to receive advance notification of shipments. Complete safeguards information training, name a point of contact and backup, and confirm reservation borders. Regarding the SGI training, this training consists of approximately 20 slides explaining what safeguards information is and mirrors the training that states receive. The point of contact and backup will need to confirm that they've completed the training and confirm that they have in place the processes and equipment required for protection of safeguards information. Regarding identifying a point of contact, this will be the responsibility of the tribal leadership to designate. And about the reservation border confirmations, the NRC uses the census data from the U.S. Census Bureau with overlays of approved transportation routes. So confirming reservation borders should be relatively straightforward. The agreement of these borders really relates to where the shipment crosses the boundaries. Now, with the second and third parts of those, what you're seeing on the slides there, is relatively less difficult to complete than the first. I proposed to NRC leadership the suggestion that staff could offer SGI training at the next NTSF annual meeting. They are supportive as long as there is tribal interest. So at this point, I would like to ask 2 questions for tribal attendees on the phone. Number 1, would having the NRC host SGI training at the next annual NTSF meeting in 2016, would that be something of interest to the tribes? And number 2, if the NRC was prepared to enroll any willing tribe during that time, would that be viewed as presumptuous or helpful? So at this point, I'd just like to pause for any feedback to those 2 points, those 2 questions.
Hi, Stuart. This is Lisa Hanairo. Thank you for pausing at this time. I would ask if there are any tribal participants who would like to respond to that question now, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I will note that we do have a question specifically for the tribal representatives on the post-webinar survey asking whether training would be of interest at the NTSF meeting. I see one. We have Heather Westra representing the Prairie Island Indian community saying yes to the SGI training and maybe to the idea of enrollment. If there are any other tribal participants who want to speak now, please raise your hand and we'll open your line.
Cassandra, we unmuted you, so go ahead and ask your question.
Cassandra, we can't hear you, so try again, and it's possible that your computer's microphone is not picking up your voice. Okay, Cassandra doesn't have a microphone, but I think Richard Arnold might. So Richard, go ahead, your line's open.
Right, thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I'm Richard Arnold, and I also work closely with the NTSF and in addition to the Tribal Caucus. And I think in echoing Heather Westra's support of having the training, I think that is an excellent idea. We need to somehow try to encourage more people to participate. And so I don't know, there's 2 options, I believe. I think one would be at the next NTSF meeting, or there's a Tribal Caucus meeting that may be better suited for training. And either one, we may have to just look and explore the dates on availability for both NRC and the tribes, which would be the best. But I don't think there's any presumption assumed that if we were trying to go ahead and enroll any tribes that were interested at that time, as long as the proper leadership is there to give the appropriate guidance and support of that particular tribe. But again, I think the SGI training is appropriate, and again, exploring the option for seeing if there's any tribes that would want to enroll. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
And this is Lisa again. It looks like Cassandra is saying yes to the training, and they will have someone listed for the Federal Register list of recipients of notification. It doesn't look like we have any other tribal participants raising their hands, so I'll just remind everyone to please answer that question if you fill out the post-webinar survey, and we always hope that you do. And Stuart, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. So with any comments I receive here, I'm going to discuss the approach with leadership here, and then if approved, I plan to present the options to the NTSF caucus mid-year, and then partner with the caucus to develop a training session that will be efficient and helpful. So with that, I will. I'm done with my presentation, and I'd like to next slide, please, so we can have the contact information. And I'll end there and just open it up for any questions for Dave or Jerry or myself.
Thank you, Jerry and David and Stuart, for your presentations. We do have several questions typed as you all were speaking. We'll start with Rick Moore, representing Eureka County, Nevada. All the routing discussion was about highways. Please describe the process for rail, since that will be the main shipping method for spent nuclear fuel.
Hi, so this is Jerry Jackson. I hope you can hear me. Rail is going to be a very similar process. In other words, we're going to look at the rail routes, we're going to look at the communication, we're going to look at did the applicant make the proper notification or delineations as to who they're going to contact, what routes they're going to use, who are they going to coordinate with. So it's a very similar process to road. Again, that's actually delineated when you look in the Code of Federal Regulations under 7337. Information on rail is in there, and you'll also see some information on the new reg for guidance. But it's a very similar process. There are some nuances, obviously, but we'll go through the same evaluation process, making phone calls out, making sure they put the right points of contact down, as we did for a road.
Thank you. And related to that, we have a question from Paul Plant with Maine Yankees. Can one of the speakers discuss what kind of unique measures or considerations would be necessary if it was desirable to use a water route as part of the shipping plan? And Jerry, I will amend that or append to that question my own question, which is you talked about the rail approvals lasting 7 years and road 5 years. Is there a time frame for barge route approvals?
That's an excellent question. To date, I think there's only been one cask that I know of that has been shipped by barge. It's a very complicated and intricate process. A lot of it deals with intergovernmental coordination with primarily the U.S. Coast Guard, who has the responsibility for the security of hazardous materials on navigable waterways. On U.S. flag vessels, there would have to be a cooperation between the Coast Guard and the NRC for transfer points, for safety. It's not out of the question, but it would be a detailed conversation. And then your other question was on timelines, I'm sorry?
Yes, on one of your slides you showed that there was a 5-year, once a route is approved for highway, that approval is good for 5 years, and for rail routes, the approval is good for 7 years. And my question was, is there a time frame for barge route approvals?
I don't think you could call and this is stepping back, I can speak directly to the CFR, which states 5 and 7 years. A barge route, a navigable route, is not like you're running down a road. While you may use the intercoastal waterway or you may go 12 miles offshore, there's no way for the NRC to inspect that. Again, that would be a close coordination with the U.S. Coast Guard, and I'm sure other agencies involved as well, but primarily the Coast Guard and the states through which boundaries may pass.
Thank you. And we have a question from Heather Westra, again representing the Prairie Island Indian community. With regard to the 5 and 7 year approvals, if a tribe opts into the pre-notification process, will the shipper have to revise their route information to include notification to the tribe, or will the tribe have to wait 5 or 7 years? That is related, I think, to a question that Charles Messick posed, which gets to the point of what happens if after a state is coordinated with on a route approval, the state needs to change the route approval afterwards, maybe due to construction or other reasons. So what is the general process then for states or tribes to have influence over route approvals after they've been made?
So the person or the organization that submits the route has the requirement to stay in touch with affected parties. So if a tribe chooses to opt into the notification process, the NRC will do its due diligence to make everyone aware of and put them on the notification requirements. The shipper, before they move, and again, when you look at the timelines, before they move that material, they are required to reach out, and that's when they would have to contact the tribes. The tribes would not be in a waiting situation. The tribe would be on first notice situation. They don't go, it's not like you go to the end of the line for 5 years. As soon as a tribe opts in, the tribe is now part of the notification process, and the requirements for the shipper is to make those coordinated efforts, and that's when they are required to talk to the tribal nations. And then you get into the details and nuances, as Dave talked about. LLE coordination. Is this a good safe haven? Does the tribal official coordinate with the licensee and say, yeah, this is a good route, or no, this is not a good route, and here's what's going on? And that's the similar process with a state maybe having road construction. Again, the due diligence for the shipper, they are required to take a look at that route on a periodic basis, and it's right in there in the regulations. To, on a periodic basis, look at those routes, and if there's a new overpass or a road construction, or a give it a natural phenomena where there's a bridge washout, or I-10 in Southern California gets washed out and now it's closed to public transportation. Those type of notifications are on the licensee when they're making their final preparations for movement.
Okay, thank you. We do have some more written questions, but I think we're going to turn it over for a bit to the people who have their hands raised. Caitlin?
All right, Melissa Bates from the Department of Energy. I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question. Go ahead.
My question is, so understanding that there is likely a large contingent of tribal populations that are not represented on this webinar, will we be sending out a question to a larger population to ask the same two questions as far as would they have interest in a training at NTSF, and furthermore, would they be interested in potentially signing up with the NRC for route notifications at that time?
Yes, so we have reached out to all 566 tribes. I think a year ago, or maybe it's been a little bit more than that, asking tribes that if they would like to participate in giving them the instructions that I've just provided. And we did have, I want to say approximately 20 tribes say they wanted to participate, but we haven't had anybody complete the process. So, you know, the NTSF is an excellent forum for this discussion. And after talking further with Richard about this, we may do something and reach out to additional tribes, or maybe even outreach to tribes that have expressed interest in the past. I did make calls earlier this year to those tribes as well, so we're continuing to follow up. But nothing precludes us from reaching out to all tribes again in the future if need be.
Thank you. This is Lisa again. I see that George from New Hampshire has his hand raised, but George, you need to enter your audio pin or else we can't unmute your line. So please enter that, and in the meantime, we'll move on to a question from Steve Maharis with Pacific Northwest National Lab. For rail, how many routes are typically submitted in a package that is a primary, and how many alternative routes?
I think the question is, with respect to a route that's submitted, and correct me if I'm wrong, you submit one route, but you can, in your contingencies, consider alternate routes. But there's only one route that's going to be submitted, and that's the one that's going to be examined and approved. But again, conditions warranting, you may have alternate routes, and that's where it's paramount for good coordination prior to the shipment with all of the parties through which the material will be moved, so that they understand if X happens, if this rail line is out of commission because of heavy snow, what's the alternative? If it can't move, what's the safe haven? Again, good coordination between shipper and through and the organizations through which this material will be moved is key to a successful shipment. So it's not like you submit a primary route and a secondary route. You submit a primary route, but you consider good communications for the movement that you're going to be doing.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Heather Westra, Prairie Island Indian Community. When you refer to local law enforcement, does that include tribal law enforcement officers who may be cross-deputized?
That's a good question. I would think it would be, again, if they're part of a community through which material is being moved, the tribal designee or the official that's being designated as the person to coordinate they're going to coordinate with who they seem fit. So if it's going to be a tribal representative, I don't see why not.
Okay, thank you. This is a question from Tony Lashinsky with the state of Vermont. How are routes or schedules adjusted for one-time events? For example, what if your accepted route unexpectedly has a much larger population to address, say something such as a World Series game?
Excellent question. And again, key, local law enforcement coordination. If you're the licensee and you're about to move your material, you coordinate with the local law enforcement and say, hey, you know, we're still intending on move this, and local law enforcement and the state governor designee says, you may want to think about that because we have the Super Bowl here tomorrow. So it's not going to be a good idea. Again, key to this entire process is good coordination between the licensee and through the venues which the material is going to move. The local law enforcement, whoever the governor or the governor designee deems responsible for this information, that coordination is key.
To Jerry's point as well, this is David. We had a situation several years ago where we had the inauguration going on, and obviously being positioned here in D.C., that's kind of a central part of heading north and south on I-95. And as Jerry said, the coordination with the local law enforcement who is in contact with the FBI and Department of Homeland Security, et cetera, to orchestrate a safe shipment. The requirement at the time was don't make a shipment during this time period. Don't make a shipment of any type of radioactive material. Not that it would be unsafe, but should something go wrong, even if it's just sitting in traffic and somebody make a phone call saying there's radioactive material, I'm concerned, just to avoid the whole scenario, there was a period of time where shippers were told not to make shipments until the overall inauguration events were completed.
Great, thank you. George from New Hampshire, I'll ask you, maybe you didn't intend to raise your hand, but if you do have a question, it would be best to type your question in because we can't unmute your line unless you enter your audio pin. Moving on, we have a few more minutes. Steve Harris from Pacific Northwest National Lab had another question. Do long rail tunnels such as the Hoosac Tunnel pose a problem from a rail route approval perspective?
This is Jerry. From a rail route approval, I would say no. Again, the local law enforcement, the local response agencies, the rail lines through which this is going to be moved need proper coordination so that they understand the nature of the material being moved, the challenges that it could face, and, you know, again, key understanding of the local environment. The local law enforcement, the local response agencies, they know their environment better than anybody in the NRC or anybody outside of their community. So when the licensee proposes to move material through these environments, over bridges, through tunnels, it's key for that type of coordination to be made before the material moves.
Okay. Did you have more to add to that?
No, I'm just, no, again,
okay.
Key is coordination.
Okay. I see another question is in the queue, and it's from Tony Memo. Tony Memo with the Seneca Nation of Indians. He asks, is the safeguards training in an independent study format, or is the training delivered in a formal classroom setting only?
It was originally provided as slides, a packet that was sent with the letter. Those slides are independent study, and as we were discussing earlier in the presentation, you know, the NRC could come to the next NTSF and provide that training and be able to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Okay, great. Cassandra had a question asking where the information on the listing of the states and tribal representatives, where they identified, and what I would say, Stuart, if you'll send us the link to the current NRC listing, we will put that in the follow-up message that'll go out after this webinar. We have another question from Tony Lashinsky. What's the rationale for highway and rail routes having different lengths of approvals?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I can dig into that a little bit further here and get back to you individually, but I don't have an answer to that. I'm sorry.
Not a problem. Caitlin, it looks like we do have a few more questions, but if we need to, I can turn it back to you.
Sure, we've just got about 5 more minutes before the end of the hour, so anyone whose questions weren't asked, we apologize. We will get those answers to you offline, so don't worry about that. Thank you so much, Jerry, David, and Stuart, for your presentations, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Michael Wangler again for a preview of upcoming NTSF activities.
Thank you, Caitlin and Lisa, for leading this webinar. I'd like to remind everyone that this year's webinars we'll have this year, are being organized by members of the NTSF Planning Committee and the Ad Hoc Working Group leads. Today's webinar was organized by David Strack, a member of the Planning Committee, and earlier this month, the Rail Routing Ad Hoc Working Group organized the Rail 101 webinar. In the months ahead, we hope to offer sessions organized by the ad hoc working groups on transportation planning and information and communications, plus the Tribal Caucus will be contributing a session on Tribal 101. Another reminder, or a little bit more information about our 2016 annual NTSF meeting. It will take place in Orlando, Florida, from June 7 to 9. A save the date note will come out later this year from the Southern States Energy Board, our regional co-host. Caitlin?
Thank you, Michael. In closing, I want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. A message with the link to the recording will be sent out later today and also be posted on the NTSF wiki site. As soon as we're done, each of you will see a pop-up window that has a very brief survey. If you could please take the time to fill out that survey so that we can get feedback to help us improve these webinars, that would be much appreciated. That also helps us identify topics and speakers for future sessions. For more information on the NTSF, including past webinar recordings and meeting announcements, check out the NTSF wiki site. This concludes today's webinar. Enjoy the rest of the week, everyone.